Okay, Penny, welcome back. This looks like a bit of an emergency meeting. I understand you have an assessment you need to discuss for Let Kids Be Kids. Now, if I understand this right, and it sounds like a bit of a mouthful, it's an acronym. What exactly is the HEEADSSS Assessment, spelled HEEADSSS Assessment?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's obviously an acronym. So it stands for Home, Education, Employment, Eating, Activities, Drugs, Sexuality, Suicide, Depression, and Safety. So when you look it up online, it's described as a comprehensive psychosocial interview format for adolescents. So that's what the HEEADSSS assessment is that we're here to talk about today.
Okay, so give me some context. What led to Let Kids Be Kids having an interest in this?
Yeah, so we had no idea that this was a thing. And then a parent received a letter, a lot of parents received a letter from their school at the beginning of the year, which actually came through Te Whatu Ora and their local public health nurse. So they'd gotten obviously the enrolment details of the child going in to start high school. And they sent a letter out to all parents saying, hey, the government's given us some funding, so now we're going to roll this. And they didn't call it a psychosocial interview assess format. So they called it an assessment framework. So they kind of made it sound a little bit more innocuous than it was. And they said it was going to be rolled out to all incoming Year 9 students at this public school.
Are our Year 9 students suddenly in need of being psychologically assessed?
Well, that's the question, and that's really what made us go and look at it further is are they doing it based on a need, or are they doing it because funding was provided for them to just offer it? They said in the letter that we're offering an extra health and wellness check was what that was. Oh,
that's lovely, an extra wellness check. I mean, that's good, right?
Yeah, and so there was a couple of alarm bells in the letter itself that the parents saw, and they sent it through to us, and we pulled it back and did a bit of research. But the one of the most concerning things at the end of the letter was that the child was opted in unless the parent opted them out. And so this letter came through at the end of the school holidays, and it had about a week where it said the way to opt them out is you've got to send a letter, you've got to complete this form, walk it into the school office and do it like that. So there seemed to be quite a clunky process to be able to opt out. So that was another alarm bell. So the parent that contacted us, and this happens quite a bit, is parents will contact us about concerns on behalf of other parents that it might have not raised an alarm bell with.
Well, probably hasn't raised alarm bells with many parents if they're not aware of what's in it. And it sounds like a nice thing to have done. I assume it's done by some kind of professional, or are these nurses and teachers?
Yeah, so the way that this letter was saying, it was actually from the public health nurse, not from the school itself. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting as well, because then you say, well, how did they get that information? And as we go through, we'll share a little bit about what's sort of behind this, but it sounds to me like it's a tool that is used not only by GPs and nurses, it's used in hospitals. I know it's used at Starship, but it's also able to be used in school counselling settings and possibly even teachers. So it isn't necessary. It's a psychosocial tool, but it isn't being used by psychotherapists.
But it's a psychosocial tool.
Yeah.
That means it's the domain of psychotherapists. That's a very important subset of the psychological association. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
But it's not them that are doing it.
That's right. Yeah. So it's not being used in the context of people that
why is this happening?
Well, maybe it comes down to funding.
Okay.
Potentially someone had a bright idea to put this out there because they think that children are more at risk than they used to be. And this is really the premise of why we looked at it is this another government-funded ambulance at the bottom of the cliff approach where we assume the worst about what's going on in society and we treat everybody at that level?
Okay.
Or is it just being used on a needs basis, which is what we think was maybe the original intention of this assessment, and now it's being kind of misappropriated to be used for a wider context?
Okay, look, maybe this is good. I don't know. I'm going to withhold judgment for a moment. Maybe this is an important thing that the government needs to tick off to make sure kids are well and safe. What are the questions? Yeah,
so I'm just going to pull up some of the questions that are asked in the actual assessment itself. So it goes through, obviously with the acronyms, it goes through all sorts of things from home to eating and sexuality and things like that. So it starts with it has things like, who lives at home with you? Where do you live? Who do you get along with? Do you get along with your parents? What kind of things do your family argue about the most? What is your household income? And
hang on, what things do your family argue with you about? What are they getting at there? That's a very deep, intrusive question.
Well, it's quite invasive, particularly when the child is not. It's not being used as something for just to ask when the child is presenting with clearly they're in distress. So there's a place for ring fencing children, which experts and teachers should be trained to identify when a child in school is, if they're coming to school bedraggled, or if they've got bruises, or if they're, withdrawn. That to me would be the teacher, the adult's responsibility to ring fence that child and have a supportive framework around that. So we're not saying that doesn't work, that doesn't happen. But this letter really highlighted that these questions are being asked to all children whose schools are taking this on board. It's not waiting for a trigger to happen.
Right.
So when you look at some of these questions, and I'll go through a few more. No, that's right. It's a bit shocking, isn't it? When you consider the fact that most parents wouldn't know that the children are being asked, and that the information that the children is then getting drawn out of them is never going to be shared with the parent. So
never. This is never shared with the parent.
No, due to Privacy Act. So the children, children are told that this is a
probably
safe
for
space.
their safety.
Yeah, for their safety, right?
Such BS.
So other things that it has is, if you had a worry, who would you talk to? So it's actually diving into going, well, who do you trust? If you don't trust, we've seen other things going on in the education system alone, where what's being sort of presented to teenagers is to grow up is to be oppositional to your parent. So we're seeing that in other things, and we talked about it in the Roadshow, and Elizabeth Cave talked about it.
That's concerning.
Yeah, but it's a multi-pronged approach to this, what I would say a weakening of the connection between the parent and the child. That isn't a natural weakening, which we know happens when you're a teenager anyway and you want to separate from your parents. But this is kind of a contrived, calculated approach, perhaps.
Right.
That's being done through systems such as the education system and the health system. Okay. So some of the other questions are, there was a number of questions about porn use. Now, remembering that this letter came out to incoming Year 9 students, so you're talking like 12 and 13-year-olds heading off to high school. They're being asked about porn. Being asked questions. So some of the questions are, and the way that this is being used, that they're being trained to use it is, don't just read the question off the page, and we'll listen in a bit, but how to blend these into the conversation to make the child want to trust you. But the questions on the list are, do you think that people use porn to learn about sex? Does porn affect your relationship? Now, remembering these kids could be 12 to 13 and they could be as young as 10.
They might not even know about porn.
They might not know about porn. They probably won't be in a sexual relationship.
Well, no, they shouldn't perhaps be, but I would imagine. But this means they're going to be giving them this idea for the first time.
Placing it in their heads.
If you've been holding this off as a parent, now the school's telling you about porn.
Yeah, and so that was a discussion that we had when I worked with the team that I asked to analyse this, and we'll talk about that a bit. But really, then the initial response was, you're putting the ideas in the kids' heads, and if the kid didn't have those ideas going into the counselling room, they probably had them going out of the counselling room when, I probably need to go look at that. So they asked, so does porn affect your relationships? And then questions about sexual attraction, sexual activity, porn use, and also questions about suicidal ideation, remembering 12 to 13-year-olds. So this is why we raised it, because, some kids are in that space, but the majority are not. Mm-hmm. And if they are, they probably need more help than just to be asked a question by a counsellor in a room and then the parents not being involved in the process very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, what do parents need to do here? Because I'm getting that there's a lot of exclusion between parents and their kids, a kind of divorcing of them done by the person asking these questions, the teacher, the counsellor, the nurse, whomever is assigned this job, I suppose, at the school. Yeah. And you'll never know. Yeah. Because you won't be told.
You won't be told. So what we would recommend to do is, if you're concerned when you listen to this, we've got the analysis report available on our website. So download it and have a look at it and decide. So really, we're not telling you anything. We're trying to inform with things that you might not have come across but are available. So you go and have a look and you decide whether. So what you would then do if you are concerned is, if I were the parent who didn't know and I came across it, I'd be like, well, I want to know whether that's coming into my school. So the first thing to do is just go and ask just ask questions. What mental health assessments or health assessments are being done on my child in school?
Yeah. Ask
them. Don't just say, you don't even bash down the door and say, are you doing this assessment necessarily? It could just be, what assessments are being done? Mm-hmm.
All right, so I see here we have a segment from a podcast about this HEEADSSS assessment featuring the Honourable Dame Sue Bagshaw.
Yes.
who's she when she's at home, and what's her involvement in the HEEADSSS assessment?
Yeah, so Dame Sue Bagshaw has been involved with family planning for over 20 years. So that's connected to the Planned Parenthood Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's now renamed Sexual Wellbeing Aotearoa, and it's the one that's created the resources called Navigating the Journey that are in many schools that they're using for their sexual education. She's also involved with the formation of something called youth hubs down in Christchurch, which helps with gender distressed young people.
Mm-hmm.
So she's one to really look at if you're critical of this gender ideology coming out. She appears to be a prominent advocate in this space around HEEADSSS. In fact, she may be the key person of using HEEADSSS, because in the podcast we're about to listen to, she explains that she actually added some of the extra acronym letters. She added the original HEEADSSS assessment.
There's quite a lot of acronyms in there.
Yeah.
HEEAD. There's a lot.
Yeah.
So she's adding more letters to it.
She's added more letters to it, and then what she does is she trains the people who she thinks that will be using it. Okay. So let's have a listen.
All right, here we go.
Kia ora and welcome to Goodfellow Podcasts. This episode is kindly supported by the Auckland faculty of the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners. I'm Dr. Louise Kler, a specialist GP, and today I'm fortunate to have Dr. Sue Bagshaw with me to discuss the HEEADSSS assessment, how to do a HEEADSSS assessment in a young person in a 15-minute consultation or less. Sue is a primary care doctor specialising in adolescent and youth health at a one-stop community youth health centre for young people aged 10 to 25 years, which she helped to set up. She's a senior lecturer in adolescent health at the Department of Paediatrics at Christchurch Medical School. She spent 20 years working at family planning and 10 years in the methadone program in Christchurch. Thank you, Sue, for joining me again today. We're talking about the HEEADSSS assessment and dealing with young people in our consultation room. So not all our listeners will be familiar with the HEEADSSS assessment. So I wonder if you can just tell us about this assessment tool and what its purpose is.
Sure. It was actually put together by an adolescent health doctor in the States called Henry Borman in, I think, late 80s or maybe earlier. And then it was developed by a couple of guys in the States, Golden Ringer, and I can never remember his other name. And then various people have developed it since. I must have to admit I've added a few letters. And really, I teach the fifth year medical students in Christchurch. And so they all learn to do HEEADSSS sort of by rote in terms of different questions for the different letters.
All the doctors.
But really, to be honest, you never should use it like that.
Fifth-year medical students.
I see HEEADSSS as a framework. As I say, it was put together by doctors working with their adolescent patients, but I actually have taught it to youth workers, teachers, all sorts of people.
Teachers.
And I see it as an engagement tool. It's there to help you engage with your patient. And to be honest, I think it's relevant to all ages. You just change the kind of question you ask. So it's a really helpful tool to engage. It's a really helpful tool to find out the context of the presenting complaint. And we know that half the prescriptions we write don't even get filled. And the ones that get filled, half of them aren't actually followed correctly. But if you know the context of your patient, you know where they're coming from, what kind of backgrounds they've got, you're much more likely to be able to get across to them what you're giving them medication for, how to take it, and they're going to listen better because you've taken the care to find out more about them.
Okay.
So it's being touted there that like fifth year medical students will learn about it, and it's used in a patient setting. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that sounds kind of okay because...
She's got a very sweet voice. It sounds all lovely.
It's very lovely because we do want our medical professionals to be able to pick up on more of the psychological things, whether they're the experts or not. But, you know, often that is the only touch that people might have in the health system is when they go to the doctor for something else.
But as she pointed out, math teachers are being trained how to do this.
Yeah, she said
psychological
teachers.
assessment.
Yeah, which
just
they're
teachers.
not,
Sorry, no offence to math teachers. But the point I'm trying to make is it's not their thing. They're teaching a topic or a general...
And actually, from the teacher's point of view, I would say that that's a very stressful load to put on them because it's you're dealing with kids' well-being here.
Very true.
But the other thing is that she talks about patients. Now, if you take it out of the medical context that she's talking about into what has dropped into schools, which some schools, by the way, because we asked a lot of other people around the country and Some schools have been using this for years. It's not just come in this year. But I'm sorry, but students are not patients. Students are students.
Yeah.
And so now what they've done through apparent government funding, because that's what the letter says, is that they've allowed for government funding to enable a lot more children to be asked these questions prior to them becoming a patient of anyone. They're a student. That's the concerning element, is pulling something that may have had a really good intention into treating everybody the same and asking everybody these questions and putting them through an assessment framework, whether they want to or not, touted as an extra wellbeing check.
Right. Okay. There's another section. Do you want me to play that?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's see if this works. Here we
Second
go.
thing is, while you're here, if you're asthma inhaler or whatever, unless they're coming for sexual health, would you like me to talk about whether you're having sex or not, who you want to have sex with, what gender you feel you are, whether you'd like to check up on contraception or STIs?
Sorry, asthma and a gender check.
Right. So she's talking in the doctor's surgery saying, you need to go to the doctor. And I had a child that needed an asthma inhaler. So
while you're here, just blow into this. Oh, you're good asthma flow. So are you gay?
Yeah. What's your gender? So she's brought this in, and remember that she's had a long career in family planning.
Yeah.
And so what she's doing there is she's coaching doctors or whoever's going to use this assessment to be quite invasive. If I was a 14-year-old kid, by the way, I would have my parent with me, because you have to be with the child until they're 16. So
I'd hope so.
How this, and we'll talk about that a bit more about what they're coaching. But it's quite invasive, and yeah, it's not what the child came in to have a conversation about. So if you overlay that outside of the doctor's surgery and into a school counselling session, same thing. A child might come in and say, I've had a big argument with mum. Oh, and by the way, what do you fight about at home? Who do you trust? Has anyone been in jail? You see?
Are you arguing about certain things?
And by the way, what's your gender identity?
Yeah.
How are you feeling about sex? What's your porn use like?
Oh,
right.
Totally appropriate.
And if you were a teenager who may or may not be confused, because a lot of them are, but some of them aren't, it's actually opening the doorway for them to play out their victim role and go, yeah, well, someone said this to me, or someone was mean, or my brother pushed me, or my mum yelled at me. Like, that's normal stuff that goes on in a home, right? And so, but if you're a young kid, and I talk to a lot of parents and we see this pattern, it's this victim mindset. So what they're doing is they're becoming the safe space for kids to basically dob in family and friends and maybe even siblings for things that is actually sometimes just normal life.
It's interesting how she weaves her way into making her clinic the safe space to open them up to inquire about these things. There's a bit more to this. You want to hear that?
Yep.
Okay.
And that while you're here is a great phrase, because not only does it make it less embarrassing and they don't have to ask, but they can say, oh, actually, yeah, I was going to say that, but I wasn't sure how to start. Or they say, in their heads, this person knows how to talk about sex because they're doing it so matter-of-factly. I'll make a point to come back to them to talk about this stuff. And I had one young person, they came to see me 3 times for an asthma inhaler and really didn't have to, but they were sussing me out to then break the news about they felt they were gay, you know? So there's all this sussing out on both sides that's happening. And it doesn't matter if you don't ask everything, but I think it's really important you ask about mental health, mental distress, because there's so much distress around. And it's really important to ask, as a screening thing about sexuality and contraception and stuff. Because, like I said, even if they don't talk about it right there and then, it's a flag. You're saying, I'm here and I'm happy. I think in the chit-chat stuff, some people call it CHEDS.
Can we stop the...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so you can just tell there that what she's doing is saying, well, we're the safe space and we're the trusted person to talk to about sex, because, it's that narrative of, but it's probably not what you want to talk to your parents about. And the fact of the matter is parents just need to know that this is what's going on. They may think that this is totally fine and that's their choice, but the point is it's the parent choice. I just want to go back to something I wanted to say before when we're talking about this and why we did this analysis, and this is just a quote from the report that we put together. Perhaps this assessment was originally designed with good intention, the identification of wellbeing issues in children that school staff have concerns about is crucial in ensuring that those children receive targeted support to improve their wellbeing and academic outcomes. The change to now a blanket rollout of this assessment to all children in specific year groups indicates a change of purpose and a shift in policy which is not being revealed to the parents. So again, it comes back to parental awareness that this is coming on, and we don't want to be ambulance at the bottom of the cliff society that start from a place of suspicion of parents, right? Mm-hmm. That should be dealt with in a much more professional way than making an assumption that there's a problem in homes.
I think so. That's got to be damaging.
Yeah.
Especially the seeding of these thoughts.
Yeah.
For you to have to question something so deeply seriously when you're just kind of getting along with your 10-year-old little life.
And anything out there in the health space should be encouraging children to have a stronger relationship with parents, not a weaker relationship with parents.
Good
they
point.
should not be, the state should not be coming in and assuming the role of the trusted expert.
Not at all.
They should always be trying to work with the parent first. So many parents that I've talked to have experienced firsthand the state doing quite the opposite. And this to me is one example.
Now we have a clip from whatisadoctor.org. It's a new film that's just come out. Do you want to jump to that?
Yeah, I will jump to that. So, this is by an organisation called American Frontline Doctors, and it just came out really recently, and I really recommend that people go and watch it, whatisadoctor.org. And a few minutes into it, I was listening to one of the doctors there, Ethan Haim, and he raises something which is tied into what we're talking about here. So let's have a listen.
Okay.
Saw this happening where the biggest children's hospital in the world was lying to the public, the people they're taking care of, about a program that was manipulating, mutilating, and sterilizing confused adolescent children.
In March of 2022, the Texas Children's Hospital issued a public statement saying they were shutting down their transgender program due to potential criminal liability. Prior to this, the Texas Attorney General issued an opinion stating that these interventions could be considered child abuse. The Texas Children's Hospital complied, or so it seemed.
I knew, despite their outward statement, I knew that this was a lie. And I mean, that's the thing is I didn't believe it because for months. So more and more people came up to me. They're like, yeah, we're putting in these puberty blocking devices in these young kids. But I still didn't believe it because how is it that the biggest children's hospital in the world would do something they acknowledged was potentially criminal? It just seemed so outlandish. But then it was in January of 2023 that all doubt was eliminated. There was something called a Grand Rounds lecture. It usually happens every week, the most prestigious lecture series in the hospital. The topics they choose are the ones that the hospital is prioritizing. The directors of the transgender program, the one that they had said shut down, were given the opportunity to speak at this lecture series, where they talked about their algorithmic approach to hormones and blockers, the multidisciplinary clinic, right? How to ask about gender identity behind the backs of their parents, how to hide the gender identity from the parents, all on video. And then there was a Zoom conference 2 weeks after that. Multiple members of the transgender clinic, of course the one that doesn't exist, with 150 medical students, like a huge group.
This is incredible.
And there was a social worker who talked about how she would conceal evidence of the program from the state of Texas. So instead of documenting consults, she would call them in. And she says, I specifically don't give parents paperwork in order to prevent that, on video. And the currency we use as doctors is trust, right?
Oh my God. Okay, so that's just confirmed everything you've said, and it's happening overseas as well.
Yeah.
So this is endemic as some kind of global push to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's why this movie is really important to watch. It's called What is a Doctor? And it's basically saying, hey, we as doctors, and so there's some whistleblowers there, we believe, we stand behind first do no harm. And definitely in pediatrics, we stand behind the parents being involved. And so what I heard when I first heard that was, oh my gosh, I've got this report that we've done, which basically connects the premise of keeping information safe, secret from parents, and it touches into the gender stuff too, which we know that Sue Bagshaw is really into. So if she's leading health professionals into being secretive from parents. And I'm just going to quote another thing because it's not just Sue Bagshaw. There was another article that we found on NZ Doctor publication. So this is from 2021 by a lady called Kathy Stevenson, and we include this in our report. So this is part of the article that goes out to the doctor fraternity in New Zealand. So she's done an article about the HEEADSSS assessment, and it says here, create space to talk alone if possible. Don't do a HEEADSSS assessment with an adult or parent present. As hard as it can be to create space for the young person to talk on their own, it is absolutely crucial to make sure that they are enabled to talk freely about what is going on with them. I often address this at the start of a consultation using words such as, thank you so much for coming. It's really important that all young people start to have health discussions with their doctor and nurse in private, so I'm going to ask you, mum and dad, to pop out to the waiting room and I'll let you know and we can come back. And then the article says, if that fails, we may need to get creative. For example, using come down to the treatment room so we can get a urine sample or similar ploy can be, this is in the article, can at least give you the opportunity to organise time for them to come back on their own. Now remember, children don't usually see the doctor until they're 16 or 17, and in fact they can't get there themselves because they can't drive themselves, so the parent is with them. So if there's now, I wasn't asked to be sitting outside in the waiting room with my kids until they were 16. And even then, you can say, no, I'm coming in with you, but I respected their space and I let them go, trusting, because this is the whole thing. And this is why this What is a Doctor documentary is so important, because the general populace, although less and less, trust that the doctor is the expert. So now they're getting trained to try and remove the parent from the picture and have a conversation with the kid, no matter what it's about. Whether it's about food, whether it's about what's going on at home, whether it's about gender, whether it's about porn. And so we need to decide as a society, are we okay with this? Or are we actually not okay with this? So that's the conversations that we need to have. So the connection with what he's saying there is key. And you hear what he says at the beginning is that Texas Children's Hospital, which is the biggest children's hospital, actually shut down their gender program officially. But they hadn't actually shut it down. They were doing it.
But it was officially shut down, but they were all turning up to attend lectures and...
Yeah. So the whole thing
Amazing.
is done under the guise of non-full disclosure.
It's like a black project.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I sort of got shivers down my spine when I watched it and was like, I've got evidence of the New Zealand connection of the strategy being used here.
Yeah, you've got to wonder if that connects to what happened with Tavistock. How it was supposed to be shut down, never did for a while, and then went kind of rural and regional.
Yeah, well, it's strategic, right?
Yeah.
There's a strategic here to weaken the relationship between the parent and the child, or have the child believing that the parent is the problem, and the parent is the cause of their woes. And we see that through what we're looking at with all the gender stuff. A lot of the things generally come back to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a trauma response or there's something that's gone on in the child's life. And if that is true, then the first thing that you want is to try and ensure that child has the greatest amount of support outside of the state as possible. And that would usually start with the family. And then when there's situations where that's not the case, then the system can help. But what we're finding is, general everyday parents are finding that the kids won't talk to them about this stuff. Right? Why? Because, they're being shown that that's the correct way to behave.
Yeah. Yeah, they're being trained to... Trained. It's a terrible word.
And Sue Bagshaw says that. We're training the adolescents on how to answer the questions that we want to ask them. It's concerning,
Fascinating use of a phrase, isn't it?
Isn't it? Because
she said at one point, they haven't been trained yet, and we're training them to get what we want from them.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's links to the podcast and the report. People can go and listen for themselves and make their own assessment on it.
Cool. Link for that video as well?
Not in the report, actually, because the report came out before, but we were promoting
that's
that
very timely.
out.
That's only just come out,
It's just come out,
Well, okay, so it's on x.com, formerly Twitter, and you'll be looking for Frontline Films.
Well, you just need to go to whatisAdoctor.org, and then that lets you take you through, and it's free to watch. So
great. Yeah, right, they're just hosting it on X, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your overall conclusion of the analysis?
The overall conclusion of our analysis of the HEEADSSS assessment is that all kids are being treated equal, as in that lower the bar and make an assumption, or at least ask kids questions without even there being a reason to ask or sort of a trigger. So it's coming from an assumption that something might be wrong, rather than coming out of a higher assumption that something is right until shown is wrong. And it's placing situations before a child that might not exist. So we spoke to psychotherapists who are like, if you're just a normal 13-year-old kid who likes to go fishing and ride their bikes and do whatever, and they're just being a kid, and then they get sat in a room with a counsellor and they come up with all these questions. What does that psychologically do to that child? Because potentially,
hang on, sorry, you spoke to psychotherapists about this.
Yeah.
So actually, properly trained
Yeah.
medical professionals who should be able to have a discerning and trained eye over such an assessment, not the school counsellor who you think might be the best one, but certainly not just the first aid nurse and the math teacher.
Yeah, and we
who might
didn't
be
even
doing
just
it.
talk to other parents about what their opinion was on this. So
Right.
what we did was we went out to others as well. We went out to lawyers. We went out to ex-school principals, and we had a whole team of people that we were able to access.
But importantly, psychotherapists that would know the danger or the value of this.
Yeah.
Okay, what did they say?
Yeah, so they assessed the whole lot. So the questions, the way that it was being rolled out, they listened to the things. And so here's a couple of the quotes. We've got a whole page of quotes for them in the report.
Okay, yeah,
But
read away.
a couple of what the psychotherapists say are, this does not seem to be an innocent health screening process. It feels like a manipulative intervention that requires defensive action to opt out of. Anything requiring defensive action is offensive. Another one said the HEEADSSS assessment approach seems to be problem-focused, which will likely only create more problems. And then another one said...
That's very important.
It's really
because it
important.
is problem-focused.
That's right, yeah. I mean, you start
You're
putting
you're seeding these ideas into the
That's
kid's
right.
head.
Yes, you're
You're
seeding
going,
ideas.
Tell me about your problems.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because if it's really going on, it'll
They didn't come
present-
in about problems. This is forced upon them.
Yeah, because it's been presented as an extra wellness check. Remember,
Right.
in the letter, that's what it was presented to the parents. It's just an extra wellness check.
Yeah.
Right? So it's quite different. And then the last one that I've got here to quote from a psychotherapist is, if the stated intention of wellbeing was sincere, the program would inclusively educate parents and children on options rather than introduce a secretive and divisive assessment regime. Right? Secretive, underhanded, and also remembering that under the Privacy Act, anything that the child says is not going to be repeated to the parent. So if a child's had a bad day and then they get asked, how to get on with people at home, and they're like, oh, it's shit at home because, mum and dad had an argument or whatever, which happens in every home. It doesn't mean that there is abuse, right? But it's really opening the door to engage the state to become part of that situation, which will side with the child when actually it's just normal life. And I know that bad stuff happens, and I'm not discounting the fact that abuse happens in home and all of that, but the people that we connect with it are really good parents who want to do the best by their child, and I believe that the majority of people do. They are simply unaware of the state of play as far as these sorts of programs being rolled out on our children.
Okay, well, this has been so important, so serious, and thanks for dropping by to share it.
Yeah.
I guess the next question is, how can other people reach out and help? How can they offer financial assistance? I know you're just a grassroots organisation with very, very concerned parents. Where do they go to get in touch or assist?
Yeah, so just go to letkidsbekids.nz and on there you can find all our social media links as well. There's a donate page, you can find the resources, you can find all our media interviews and interviews that we do with parents. There's a lot of really good information there and on other sites as well. And I just encourage parents to share it. Like, your job is just to share it out into your networks and your communities and start talking to people about things if you're concerned. Meet up with other people in your school if you are concerned about things. Some schools are good, but you don't know until you ask. And then some schools are pretty poor at what they're doing. But again, you don't know until you ask.
Actually, just as a side point, you said to me earlier, this isn't happening at private schools. So public school parents should just be pleased that it's only happening to them, I suppose.
My understanding from the people that I've spoken to, and that includes counsellors in schools, some public, some private, is that this is quite well known among public school nurses, but it isn't in private schools. So it would have to be invited in, but it probably comes down to the way that the government funding is structured, I would say, because of the difference. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, so if parents are concerned, please jump onto our website, letkidsbekids.nz, and download the resource. We've got a $5 donation charge on it, which people can add more because we do a lot of work and we are grassroots. We're obviously not government funded. And so we would really appreciate your support. But a really big part of this is writing an analysis like this allows us to speak with those in the know who don't want to be named. So whether you want to call them whistleblowers or just advisors, but we can access and we welcome in other experts in education and medical and legal that can offer their advice if we come across things that are concerning. And then we can put reports like this out to really help empower parents. We know that there are a lot of people in a lot of positions who are really uncomfortable with what's going on. They're keeping their heads down because they need their jobs. Or, and I've also heard this, that people keep their heads down because they know that they need to be in there to try and protect the kids as much as they can. To hear those sorts of things coming out anecdotally from people is we know something is wrong. Not many people know how to do anything about it or think that one person could do anything.
Yeah.
A whistleblower could change the world. This What is a Doctor documentary has 3 or 4 key whistleblowers on it. It's huge what they're saying. They cannot stand by and let this stuff happen anymore. So we're looking to talk to people like that who don't want to see this stuff happen anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I hope some people reach out to you and assist that intention.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share.
Yeah. All right. Till next time.